Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1990 Score football set. This is a really important set for Score, but it's also an important set for cards because this was right when we saw a heated race between two different card companies, Pro Set and Score, both in football, that were really pushing into the 1990s. These card sets, you could say, really drove the innovation that we would see in the next couple of years, because Score had to prove itself. And in 1988, when it launched in baseball, it launched with all the potential in the world. It didn't quite realize it yet, and so in 1989 they had the ability to improve the card set and really cement themselves as kind of the ultimate card in baseball, only, well, they found Upper Deck jumping into the pool at the same time, and this really killed their opportunity to dominate baseball. But at the same time, in 1989, they jumped over in football, and football was a great place for them to go to because there was just Topps, and Topps wasn't even taking it seriously. So Score figured they'd come in and have a card that was all about image, just showing off image so much, which Topps had okay images, but there was nothing about a Topps card that stood out and was the kind of thing that would resonate in your mind. Topps had a tendency just to have simple portraits, and not great portraits at that. Whereas with Score, they were coming in with the opportunity to do great action shots on every single card, and that's what they did. The problem was that once they jumped in, they found Pro Set had showed up at the same time, and Pro Set was, well, here's what's interesting. Score in 1988 was all about a border with a little bit of intricacy, but a bold color for a border with a very intricate and detailed shot of the player on the front, and on the back there was a ton of information. Well, in 1989, the first Pro Set card had a bold color on the outside with some detail work around it. They had very intricate images, and on the back there's a whole bunch of stuff. Literally, Pro Set in 1989 made their version of a 1988 Score baseball card, but 1989 Score football was anything but. It was a whole different kind of card. That particular card, the Score football card, was all about a big image on the front, a very strong, clear image, and then a big image on the back with almost no additional information. Not a bad card, but it was a card that was intended to show off, look at what we can do. The best way to describe it is Hollywood in the 1950s, when they colorized movies, they put the most garish colors out there they possibly could to show off what Technicolor could provide to audiences. Well, that's kind of what Score was doing in 1989 with football, was they were showing off these big, gorgeous images, which is great. But that's all they were doing. They were just showing off these images. They didn't create a card that was really an iconic card for a sports fan who was collecting the history of sports, which is exactly what Pro Set was doing. So Pro Set made the ultimate card for football collectors, whereas Score made a great looking card that was just great looking, but even at that, it wasn't all that iconic of a design. So in 1990, Score realized they needed to create a card that could outdo Pro Set. And they were going to have to make a card that was not necessarily all that different from what they'd made in the 89 set, as much as they needed to make a card that jumped out, made a statement, and locked you in, got you excited about their cards. Now, unfortunately for them, Pro Set was coming up with something even more impressive, and I'll get to that at the end. But the card that Score came up with for 1990 was everything it needed to be. It was, first off, bright colors like they'd done in 1989, only in 1989 they weren't that bright. They were kind of muted. But here in 1990, this card glowed. Rich, deep colors and multiple colors. So it starts off with one color at the top, fades through another color down to white, and then you have a band at the bottom with the same colors at the top. Now, the band down at the bottom allows them to cut these sheets where they make the sheets with a single cut mark. And they can have a lot of color variation because the top of one card blends into the bottom of the next card, And so that allows for the cut mark to be kind of varying. So they could get away with their single cut sheets that they were so good at. And well, everybody was good at, except Pro Set was starting to move away from that. But here with Score, they had a lot of intricacy to it. The colors were bright, and there was a nice floating box in the card within the image, or right over the image, with team colors. So not only do you have a bright colored card with a lot of interest to it, you also have some team color in there, just a splash of it, to really get the image of the player to read better for football fans. And then the best part of the whole card is that right at the top, the way they did their logo, they designed it into a whole theme that every single card had. And this meant that the logo for the company was literally a design element in the card. Now, on the card back, well, the card back isn't much different from the previous year. It's it's just not. They didn't really want to get too much into evolving the card. It is a little bit better than the previous year, but still they weren't competing with Pro Set, even though they were going to have to, and in 1991 they would. But 1990 was all about this card that jumps out, and it makes a statement about these are the awesome cards. And the way they did that was, I talk about the color on the front of the card. The colors are rich. They're almost candy. Not candy like in 1993 when they oversaturated everything and it became kind of fake looking. Here, it's the vividness of the colors. They're so strong on these cards, and it works so well. But also, the card was able to continue a tradition that Score used basically in every single set from 1988 all the way through 1992. And that is that every 110 cards, they changed the color. Now, that's not the case in hockey. Hockey was the one place they didn't do that. But in both baseball and football, every 110 cards, the color for the border changes, so the whole card set has this variance to it. And here, while blue was the color for the first 110 cards, purple was the color for the second 110 cards. Again, very rich, very impressive. And then when you go over to the third section, it's red. Very strong, very bold, and thankfully this was not used for very many of the veteran cards, because the problem with the red is it overpowers the images and really mutes them. And so there are a number of veteran players that show up in this third set, but this third section is all about it's mostly about subsets. And just like they had done in 1989, where in 1989 they had a 330 card set, well, here they have a 330 card set as well. And the subsets are they're a lot less than they had in the 1989 set, where the first subset is really just rookie cards. But these are not rookies like we saw in 1989. These are rookies that are pre-draft. So they're players in their college uniform, just kind of dropped onto the card. And on the back, they don't even say what team these guys are with, because Score didn't know. The draft hadn't happened. Score was trying to be first at bat for rookie cards to really get you excited about these upcoming rookies that were going to be the players you were going to collect. They wanted a beginning of the card set, and they wanted to have rookies included as well. It was a bit of a gamble, but this is what they went with. And it is weird to see the players in their college uniforms. But they did have two actual subsets, and the first one is called Hot Guns. And this carries on a tradition that they had done in 1989, but here these cards, as you can see, are all about the artistic opportunity that you had with what we would now refer to as Photoshop, but there it's basically just cutting out a player and putting something else behind, which was not an innovation. This was something that had been going on, but we hadn't seen cards with this kind of an image behind. You know, these clouds, the sky shots on these cards are just amazing, especially when you get to the War and Moon one, which is just awesome, of course. But all of these cards have such a cool look to them. And they are all quarterbacks, but there is another subset that followed called Ground Force, which is running backs. But in this case, they have lightning strikes. So they didn't have the same richness of the background, but I mean, this is a ground and pound subset. And so this is a subset that wants to show the power of these top players. And that's what these two subsets are. These are top 10 quarterbacks and top 10 running backs in the league. And that was the set. Or more correctly, that was the Series 1 set. Because Score, right from the outset, was going to follow what Pro Set had done in 1989, which is to have a 2-series set. But where Pro Set had done a single series and then they'd done a second series that was almost like an addendum, for Score, they wanted to build it as a 2-series set from the outset. 330 cards in Series 1, 330 cards in Series 2. And the colors that they chose were, well, actually, they were the exact same colors. Interestingly enough, they repeated the same 3 colors, Series 1 and Series 2. In fact, this is the only time that 2 series shared the same colors in any of their releases, even over in hockey where they were not varying the colors on them. They still used different colors between Series 1 and Series 2, or US and Canadian in the case of 1991. In this case, it was kind of like a rinse and repeat, which meant that the set was built in a very similar way, except not entirely, because you are seeing a red card of Randall Cunningham. There were a couple of veteran cards with red borders, just a couple, just a small handful. In this case, Series 2 was all about subsets, and almost all of the last 110 cards were dedicated to those, starting with All-Pro. And the All-Pro cards are, well, it's basically the same card, except instead of having the floating band, they actually have a whole box down at the bottom and then an All-Pro logo that is tacked in down there. Other than that, the rest of the card is the same on the front. They also did record breakers in the exact same way. And for the record breakers cards, this is another carryover from 1989, like All-Pro, and done in exactly the same way as All-Pro, except this is the record breaker take on it. Now, they did do something. You might have noticed that in Series 1 they had quarterbacks and they had running backs. But what about wide receivers? Well, in Series 2 they did a set called Rocket Man. And Rocket Man is wide receivers. In this case, they have a almost cutting edge 3D computer generated image, which gives you a good feel of what computer generated images looked like in the 1980s. It's really good because it's really strong, really bold, and the player is so distinct, comes out so clearly on the background, which means that even though it doesn't have anywhere near the strength of the lightning or the richness of the clouds, it has its own quality that's really cool. But it also means that we do have 3 subsets for all of the 3 playmaker positions on the offense. You got the quarterbacks, you got the running backs, and you got the wide receivers. You got all 3, although not per team. The Niners are a unique case where they have all 3. But they also wanted to get defense in on the party, and so that's why they had Crunch Crew. And Crunch Crew is basically about the most classic comic book style card ever done. This is all about that classic, well, it's about the impact. And these cards definitely carry that across. It's a lot of fun to see the way that these cards look. And then they have a subset that you would think was a carryover from 1989, which was Hall of Famers. And the reason that this feels like a carryover is because in 1989, they did have 1 card of Tom Landry. That was it. But, well, cards of Hall of Famers weren't being put into main series sets, although in 1989, Pro Set did have their announcers cards, which did include some Hall of Famers. So the precedent was starting to happen. But in 1990, Score went ahead and made a whole subset about Hall of Famers, except Pro Set did it in 1990 in Series 1. So once again, you can't talk about 1990 Score without talking about 1990 Pro Set at some point. And with the Hall of Famer cards, the Pro Set cards weren't as bold and distinct as these cards were, but the Score Hall of Famers cards is a very distinct look because of the way that these cards are designed. They look almost like not quite a temple, but it has kind of that spirit to it, which is a pretty cool quality to these cards. But they did do two standalone cards in this card set, and one of those was celebrating 25 years of Super Bowl. We were about to have the 25th Super Bowl, and so they were celebrating it with this really cool card that shows you exactly what the high end of computer graphics was like, whereas the Rocket Man was more the low end. This is a gorgeous card on the front, but the thing about this card that's special is that on the card back they break down all of the final scores of all the Super Bowls, as well as listing all the Super Bowl MVPs. Now this is interesting because, like I said, in Pro Set they were doing an MVP set, and they also had the Super Bowl logos, which did have all the same information. But this card was a one-stop shop, and I used this card so much while kind of learning the history of at least the Super Bowl in the history of the NFL. And that's what these cards did. These cards gave us the opportunity to learn about stuff that's otherwise difficult to come by, because this was the days before the internet, so you didn't have a lot of places to learn this. Score gave us a wonderful Super Bowl lesson here. They also had a card about Vince Lombardi, so that you knew about this legendary coach who was the inspiration for he was the reason for the name of the Lombardi Trophy. This gave you a whole breakdown of understanding about the coach. And that's when a sports card can reach its greatest potential, is when it is an awesome card that is also an educational card. And these two cards are absolutely that. Now, in 1989, the thing that was most significant about that score set was the fact that they had draft pick players from the first round of the draft. Well, in 1990, they did something similar where they didn't have the whole first round, but they had almost like a rookie team in a way of a bunch of star players, photos from the draft. These cards, they carry across in the same way as the 1989 rookie cards. They feel the same way, but it's not as many players. Most of the rookies in the set, which take up almost the entirety of the rest of the set, are the same as the Series 1, which is that they are a stripped down, or they're a basic card that's just like the regular player cards, except they're in their college uniforms. But in Series 2, we had already had the draft, so now we do have the team allocations on the back. So at least there's that. But it's really weird that with Score, all the Series 1 and Series 2 rookies are all in their college uniforms, and it is only the class of 1990 cards that show the players at least in their draft day images. And I guess they just wanted to get Series 2 out real early, and that's the reason for this, but it feels weird. Now, if you got a complete set, you also got an additional 5 cards that were not numerically additional, they were 1 through 5, but these were the final 5. Well, that's what it's called, the final 5. And these are the 5 players that were the last players in the selection, including Mr. Irrelevant. Because they're so late, Matt Stover's probably the only one of these 5 players who you ever would have heard of. But these are cards, like I said, only available in the complete set. But in packs, they did have inserts, what came in the form of trivia cards, like in 1989. But in 89, they had a team logo, and then they had a trivia for that particular team. In this case, this is all Super Bowl trivia, but this is not broken down by Super Bowl, it's general. So sometimes it'll specify an individual Super Bowl, sometimes it'll be across the span who had the longest touchdown, or some question like that, and then the corresponding answer. But for the 1990 trivia cards, all the fronts are the same. It's only on the back, the questions, that are different. But they also had another insert set, because one of the ways that they released these cards was in blister packs. And in blister packs, like over in baseball, they had their hot cards. But where in baseball, the cards were glowing. In this case, they went the opposite direction, and they really made it subdued with a black border with red as a detail that popped out of the card, making these cards look really great as opposed to being very bold and overpowering. But speaking of black, they also had a supplemental set like they had done in 1989. Here they did a 1990 set, but these cards all have a T on the back, like a traded set, So even though 1989 and 1991 are absolutely score supplemental, in 1990 it's more like a score traded set rather than score supplemental, but still with the black border, this is gorgeous. And oh yeah, it's in this set that you have Emmitt Smith. He didn't show up in the main set. This is the only case where you weren't getting Emmitt Smith rookie cards out of packs. Well, I guess I should say that was the case in Fleer and Topps, but those don't count. So really only Action Packed and Pro Set had Emmitt Smith rookie cards coming out of packs. Even Score didn't bother to do that. But they did have their Score supplemental set. Now, they also did their Hot 100 cards, and these came in a blister pack in complete set form. In the case of this particular football release, the cards look identical to the main cards in the set. I mean, absolutely identical. Okay, not entirely identical, because setting aside the fact that the numbers are different, all three series of cards, any player who came from any one of the three different border colors, they all came as blue. So all 100 cards are a blue border. So in the case of the players like Joe Montana, it's the same from the main set and in the 100 set. So you got to look at the card number to know the difference. But at least any player who had a different color for the card border, well, okay, their card actually does look different. But I don't know why they did this set identical to the main cards in the set. It's a little bit frustrating, but you might possibly run into those. But they also picked up their tradition of young superstars from baseball here for football. But in this case, they have a wonderful black border. They really like these black borders for these for these additional sets. And this is a card set that looks obviously at the rookies who were really coming into their own in their first year, or maybe second year. Basically, these were the young players who were proving that they were going to have a great career. But again, the black borders are a wonderful look to this card set, where the whole card set, from beginning to end, with the exception of the trivia cards, all of these cards are meant to look rich and wonderful and to be truly a high-end card, basic card brand. But they also they still had a contract with Franco Harris, and they took advantage of this in 1990, where the artist Neiman created a painting for Franco Harris, and it was presented to Franco Harris, but they also took that painting and they made a sports card featuring that Score then used as a special release card. This is a card that's pretty difficult to come by. It is a card that tends to be very expensive. It's not all that elaborate of a card, as much as it's just kind of cool to see the art on it. But if you're a Franco Harris card collector, this is one of those that is definitely something to tuck into the back of. One of these days I'm going to get one of those. But it is a really interesting card. But speaking of Franco Harris, I also have to mention that there is something very unique in the 1990s Score football world, which is that they did a greeting card with Franco Harris on the front. Now, this is not the only time we had greeting cards, because actually Pro Set was doing it with their Santa Claus cards. But for Score, they took the Hall of Fame card for Franco Harris, and they made a whole greeting card with him on it that they were then able to distribute out. And this is something that you're very, very unlikely to come across. But if you're lucky enough to come across one, it's a really cool feature I think it's a really cool feature in a card set. In fact, when I stumbled upon this about a year ago, let's just say that was a good day for me. I was very surprised by it, and it's again, something that only in 1989 and 1990 were you seeing these kinds of things happening. This kind of interaction where they step away from just cards and do something even more than that. And so this is a wonderful little perk that we get in the 1990 Score football card set. And that is the stuff that they released for this set. Now, I did mention about with 1990 Pro Set, where when Score did this card set for their 1990 release, they were trying to jump past Pro Set and kind of clear them, only to find that Pro Set had already done that by removing parts of the border and making a card that is even more image forward, even more team oriented, and even more dynamic with part of the border missing. And so that meant that for 1991, Score was going to have to jump significantly far even beyond this, which they would do. The 1991 Score card is an amazing card. But that's not to say this isn't, because this is truly an amazing card as well. But this is an amazing card for 1990. 1991, all ships would have to raise, and Score would definitely be up to the task. I'm going to look at that separately. I've been talking long enough about the 1990 set, so I'm going to bring this to a close. But definitely watch out for that, which will come in time. I've already done the 1989 Score set, so if you want to go check that out, I do urge you to do so. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, I'd urge you to do that as well. And thank you very much for watching.